Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream for History Fight podcast. And today I am joined by Dr. Samuel Zinner, James Valliant, and my co-host DjSeanski. Today we're going to be talking about an individual that has apparently escaped justice or hasn't received justice at all, who was an attendee at the Wannsee conference. And we're also going to be talking a bit about, well, actually, this is the first thing we're going to cover real quick, is that Dr. Samuel Zinner is going to address an issue involving Robert Price, for he has published a contribution of Samuel's once again in his Journal of Higher Criticism. So, Samuel, go ahead.
Oh, all right. Well, it's I'd
And this is the article for everybody to see right here.
yeah. First of all, everyone, bear with me. I hope I'm as coherent as I can be. I've been trying to fight a little strain of influenza. Um, yeah. So I had um, submitted an article sometime. I don't know. It has been several months ago to Dr. Price's Journal of Higher Criticism. This is before I had seen, and actually, I think even before the videos that Jacob and others have put out about Dr. Price's associations with racists and white supremacists, right? And so I'd intended not to, and I haven't submitted any more essays uh, to him. So this one was as a result of something I had submitted long ago to him. And I would say that um, what I think everyone, myself included, everyone is waiting for is a response from Dr. Price to the specific uh, charges, right, that have been leveled against him. Right. So not some response about in general way, right, about being canceled by wokeism or something like this, but to try to address the concerns about the racist and white supremacists that he's either published or that he knows personally. And I still don't have a grasp on all these details, just enough that made me concerned. And so that's what I'm waiting for, and I think everyone else is waiting for is some response from him of a very specific nature rather than something that's general. And I'm personally going to withhold ultimate judgment until I hear some response like that. Right, because he could say I'm sorry. I don't know. He could say I was ignorant, but whatever the response might be, it would be appreciated by a lot of people. He because he has a lot of interest even in among scholars. I know the late great Patricia Crone, the Quranic scholar, Western Quranic scholar. Uh, uh, Wrote about Price, very much enjoyed his work, right? He's very entertaining, right? And so, Dr. Margaret Barker, I could give many, 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 many names of friends of his and people. And so I think that everyone would appreciate some direct, specific response from him about these charges that have been leveled against him beyond a general response, right, of being canceled. Um, by wokeism. So last thing I'll say is that the reason I originally submitted some articles to Dr. Price for that journal was because for many years I was aware of the Journal of Higher Criticism, and I really admired it for works, especially by the contributions by people like the late uh, Rabbi Dr. Jacob Neusner, for example. And so when I was offered the opportunity to submit, I thought this is a great thing. So anyway, enough of that, unless some of you have some questions for me.
No, I can totally understand your position. But it was after you told him you no longer wanted to be published in his journal that he ran this in this month's edition of the Journal of Higher Criticism.
And just for context, real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, this is the Journal of Higher Criticism, Volume 18, number 3, published on October 15th, 2023. So if anybody looks it up, that's what it is. That's the one we're talking about.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah. So, well, what I would say is, all I know is that the last time I submitted something to him, which is quite a while ago, was well before um, the videos that Jacob and Derek at Mythvision, right, had published, right, or put up online, right, and so.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, no, I don't think that Bob or Dr. Price has consciously contradicted my wishes, because, right, what I did was I submitted the article to him, and my intention was, I'm not going, he hasn't gotten any emails from me, right, since then, because I'm not, I don't, quite frankly, I don't want to do anything until we hear a public response from him, right? Answering the specific allegations, right? The specific allegations. And so I'm withholding my judgment until then. I mean, I have my personal feelings. It doesn't look good to me to have so many racist white supremacists,
Right.
you know, even there by association, right? And so that's why, of course, I'm just not going to submit anything again. But so that's what it is. This article, I was surprised because I thought everything I had submitted had already been published. It was that long ago. So I'm not going to say that he's done something against my wishes. Who knows? Maybe he found something from a couple years ago that he had forgotten to publish. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I think most people would know, maybe not on this podcast, but most people who know me know I'm also a Holocaust scholar, right? And I'm an award-winning Holocaust scholar. Not to toot my own horn, but this is a lifelong interest of mine. I would say passion, not only historically, but also the what I like to call it as the long hand of Hitler, right? Still affects me and my family to this day, right? Wow. And so it's very shocking, right, for me to find out these things that Jacob and Derek revealed, right, because of, well, like Rabbi Neusner's contributions, some decades ago to the Journal of Higher Criticism. So, it's truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, as they say.
It sure is.
Right. Well, that was what was disturbing to me, frankly, is it's not a question. If it was just a question of, say, voting for Donald Trump or something, it wouldn't have even moved the needle for me. But it's associations with Holocaust deniers and former Nazis, and the denial of publishing these people or working with these people that most concerns me. But would you say now, though, Dr. Zinner, that you'd request Dr. Price not publish anything that he may have lingering in the
yeah, I'll it looks like I'm gonna have to intervene and contact him, and yeah, let him know what I've just said here. Is that is a lot of people who are your friends would like to hear a specific response, a response to the specific allegations, right? And as I say, I'm going to withhold judgment. He could say, I'm sorry. Or he could say, I was ignorant. But, I mean, he could say many things, but he hasn't said anything specifically. And that's really what is needed. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
That's really what is needed. It can't be totally ignored because he has so many connections with the world of scholarship. And I could name a lot of names. Right. And I named one like Dr. Margaret Barker, right, who's a good friend of mine as well, and so it would be good to clear the air one way or the other, right? To know just to hear a good response from him, an honest one, and see what he has to say. And when allegations are made, people have a right to make a response, but I think also when one is a public figure, one probably has a duty, right, to make a response.
Right.
A response that's detailed, specific in nature, rather than just general. Right? And it's the same thing about who someone votes for is no concern of mine. I don't even live in America, so you can vote for who you want to. But so that's not the issue. One just can't say, well, I'm a victim of wokeism. Well, maybe he is to a certain extent for some of those views, but this is not about that. This is about something else.
Indeed.
Right? And so that's what would be helpful.
Yes, sir, I agree.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift to the main topic, the Wannsee conference. Before we get into the intrinsics of the individual that we're going to be focused on, can you tell the audience what the Wannsee conference is for those that may not have ever heard of it before?
Well, in German, it's a Wannsee, right? So the Wannsee conference, right? So in the old days of Holocaust scholarship, there was often this idea that the Wannsee conference was where a decision, right, was made, right, for the final solution, the Endlösung of the so-called Jewish problem or Frage, this question. But it was quite a while ago in the history of Holocaust scholarship, right, where most now realize that decision had already been made. And I think when you listen to the Reichstag address that Hitler gave, right, before World War II, right, which was actually written by Goebbels, right? So he said, I'll paraphrase, if the world finance Jewry, right, is successful in drawing Europe and the world into another world war, this will not result in the Bolshevization of the world, right? His fantasy of, what a Jewish victory would be, but the extermination or the annihilation of Jewry in Europe, right? So I think it should be clear, right? The decision had already been made. What the Wannsee conference was about was, right, to get all the heads of the different Nazi agencies together in one place to discuss how to coordinate, right, better coordinate the coordination, right, of how the final solution or the extermination of Jews or the Holocaust, right, would be carried out, practically speaking, by all the different agencies. Right. So it was also something going on there. Also, there were, as is normal, certain conflicts, right, between different agencies. This always happens whether you're in a democratic government, you're talking about a democratic government, or a fascist government, right? There's always these personality conflicts and competition between different agencies. And so what had to happen in the Wannsee conference was to sort of neutralize some of these competitions and conflicts, right? To get the Nazi machinery of death to work more smoothly, right? So it's a coordination between all the different Nazi agencies, right? To on a practical level, to be able to carry out the final solution. But it's not as if, as I said, the decision had not been made yet, and it's not as if it was not already being carried out. Because by the time of the Wannsee conference, right? They could already say that certain areas were Judenfrei, right? They're already free of Jews. In other words, all the Jews have been exterminated from certain places, right, in Eastern Europe, or you know, these areas of the former Soviet Union, like Estonia, I believe. Like that's one of the early scenes in one of the two, at least the two earlier film adaptations, right, of the Wannsee Conference. Just minutes into it, one of them has Leibbrandt announcing with glee, right, that I think it's Estonia was Judenfrei, right? So there was already genocide going on before the Wannsee Conference, right?
The perception we have, Dr. Zinner, is that while it was the clear intention of the Nazis, and you can see it, as you point out, in speeches by Hitler, statements of the Nazi Party earlier, the intention, the ultimate intention was clear. The perception that we have historically is, though, that while the concentration camps were gathering them and still and doing a bunch of killing, obviously, and tormenting, obviously, that the real mass killing didn't begin until into World War II, and that's when you began to see the big numbers coming out of the concentration camps.
That's right, and but World War II, right, which began in late 1939, right, and so the Wannsee Conference is right, really 41. So right, so the mass killings, the genocidal activities I'm referring to, were the part of, right, would be related to like the operation in the wake of Operation Barbarossa, right?
Right.
Yeah. And also, it's important to keep in mind that there is always in genocide an interplay between ideology and daily conditions on the ground, right? So we can see this also in the Turkish genocide of the Armenians, right? So it's not always just the ideology, like a genocidal ideology like the one we see when we read Mein Kampf. Ideology doesn't play an exclusive role. The ideology always it goes back and forth. It alternates with conditions that are developing during war, for example, and so certain desires. Excuse my English. I'm not finding the right words here, but certain goals, right, will be delayed, right? Will have to be delayed because of certain developments in the war, right? And so there's always an interplay. So before the war, of course, there were these attempts and these plans to have the Jews immigrate out of Europe, right? Go to Madagascar or wherever, but get out of there. So obviously, it's not that, from the beginning there was this well-coordinated plan on how to physically exterminate Jews in Europe, right? There were more ideas tried than just that, right? And conditions on the ground, right, will put a stop to the ideology sometimes, right? So you see that, and that's a point that anyone who studies, who's into Holocaust studies, right, and at the university level, right, that's something they'll be aware of. They're taught that, as I was, right, by mainly by Alan Steinweiss, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Certainly,
right?
Can accelerate or slow down or hinder.
That's right, back and forth. We saw the same dynamic, right, in the Armenian genocide.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always this interplay, but right, and so once the Wannsee Conference, had been finished, however, there was still right developments on the ground, right, that either slowed or hastened the pace, right, of these killing operations, right. So ideology is not always the sole factor. It operates in tandem with the unforeseen developments of war.
So can you tell us a bit more about Leibbrandt and and also get into his apparent escape from justice.
Well, yeah, his escape from justice, period.
Right.
I yeah, well, all right. So we had he was sort of like the Alfred Rosenberg's I would say second-hand man. And so he was at the Wannsee conference as representative, right, for Alfred Rosenberg. As I said, right, he had already been involved in genocidal actions in the East before the Wannsee conference, and it was, in fact, it was his expertise in such matters, right, that was the reason for him being invited, right, as an expert to the Wannsee conference. And you'll see why I'm getting a little worked up about this as the story unfolds. He was born in Ukraine, right? And ethnic German in Ukraine. So there was these ethnic German minorities throughout what we would call the former Soviet Union, right? So there were some in Russia proper, many of these in the Volga area, like these traditional ethnic German settlements. The people had come from German-speaking lands in the time of Catherine the Great, for example. There were also several hundred settlements, ethnic German settlements in the Ukraine, right? So these were Ukrainians, right? Even though they principally spoke German, but of course, you know, they would have known Ukraine as well, right? And so Georg or George Leibbrandt, right, was born in one of these ethnic German settlements. He went on to become a scholar, also studying in you know, outside of Ukraine in Europe. And he studied history, theology, economics, right? So, you know, well-rounded. And he was very interested in the history of his own ethnic group, right, the ethnic Germans in Ukraine. And before the war, he was engaged in historical research on these groups, right, documenting the histories of these different villages, right? What are the population statistics and the general history, right, of these small villages, right? And well, part of my research in Holocaust studies has been to highlight the role that even tasks as lowly as cartography, right? So making maps or filling out little cards for reference, right? All of these things were necessary to make the bigger machinery of death to work in Nazi Germany, right? And so Leibbrandt's expertise in how to collect all these types of population statistics for these little villages in Ukraine, right, was also one of the qualities that made him an expert, right, to come and attend the Wannsee conference, right? So, but so he was a scholar. He got associated with the Nazis, I think, early on, like in early 30s, with the brown shirts, so-called. And all right, I'll fill in a little more later, but let me jump to the main point here. Is that he was responsible, right, for the complicit in different ways in the deaths of tens of thousands of, if not even greater, like 100,000 or something in the East. He was arrested by the British, I believe, as the war was drawing to a close. Anyway, we all know the Nuremberg trials were held, and then a series of trials after that, right? So he was in custody in Nuremberg, and at his trial, he came up. His defense was a bald-faced lie, and that is, he says, "Well, I was not an ideological Nazi, And he's in fact said at the Wannsee conference, he said this is a Wahnsinnpolitik, right? It's German for this is a policy of insanity, right? So, and somehow this lie helped him, be released, right? But right. So there certainly there was evidence, and even Rosenberg, right, who was executed, right? Rosenberg testified, right, that Leibbrandt, as well as others, knew about the killing actions, knew about the Holocaust, the whole plan for it, right? And we have documents where Leibbrandt, right, is there was a debate, for instance, right, during the Operation Barbarossa, and after that there was a debate: should we go ahead and kill all these Jews here, or not? Should we hold off because some of them can be good workers for us for a while? And he is very famous, at least among Holocaust scholars, that he resolved this issue saying, it's my intention to bring a solution to the Jewish problem as quickly as possible, right? And so it doesn't matter about age or their health or something like this. We just need to finalize the solution. We need to kill them all, basically, right? And he was instrumental in trying to set up gas chambers, right, in the East, right? And okay, so how could he escape this kind of justice? Well, first of all, there's this perverted perception, right? After the Nuremberg trials, what happens? The Cold War starts heating up, right? And so the American administration, their opinion or their feeling was, all right, we got to stop these trials. We got to stop the executions, because we have to have what was becoming the West German population on our side. We can't continue seeking out this kind of justice because it's going to alienate us, right? And they need to be our allies. And so someone like Leibbrandt, who had attended the Wannsee conference, was then considered, to be like a low tier figure, which to me is sort of boggles my mind. But he's considered a low tier figure, right? So all that was important was we got the top echelon, right, that we all know about, who were all executed the main Nuremberg trials. And so this just seems to me perverted to consider someone like the Leibbrandt or anyone who attended the Wannsee conference to be some minor figure that can just be released. And so he was released. He went on to be an economic advisor in the West German government, continue his historical interests, right? And that was it. Lived a happy life, I suppose, and escaped justice. So what one thinks about, right, the later Mossad kidnapping of Eichmann, right, in the trial that was held. And for me, historically, to look back on this situation, it's sort of mind-boggling that there wasn't this attitude that something similar should not be done to people like Leibbrandt, right? But that's the way it is.
He worked that closely with Rosenberg. It was known that he had these views at the conference, and it was, in your view, largely, and it's well known that the American occupying forces were becoming increasingly sensitive to German public opinion as they began to be more and more afraid of the Russians and the Bolsheviks, and so it's infamous how they started letting things going under the radar.
That's right. If you look at the trial of the generals, the Nazi generals, there was not a single execution, and most of them got off, with very light sentences or no sentences at all. And that was the general scenario that unfolded right after all the main executions, right, of the so-called the International Military Tribunal, right, those first trials, right. That was the pattern, right. And And so there is an episode that I go ahead, please.
Very famous American film, Judgment at Nuremberg, about how judges, even judges who had enforced racist laws, were mostly getting off at the Nuremberg trials because of these political pressures.
Right, as I say, it was the view of the American administration, right, that we need the new West German populace, right, to be our allies. We don't want to alienate them, right? So stop seeking justice. But this is a particularly egregious example because this Leibbrandt was responsible, complicit in the murder of tens of thousands, if not, as I said, more Jews, right? So this, to me, is a major figure of the Holocaust. And in fact, you know, the reason how I got started on this Leibbrandt research was that I guess viewing that first film film adaptation of the Wannsee Conference, where right, seemed to present Leibbrandt as sort of a buffoon in a certain way, right? So in the Wannsee Conference, in this movie, right, someone brings up the point, someone mentions Kiev, right, Ukraine, and then Leibbrandt is made to say, oh, that's where I'm from, right? And we have, like, I forget what the statistic was, but we have so many thousands of Jews there. And then Heydrich, I think, or someone else looks at him and says, you mean had, right? So he's made to look like this ignorant buffoon, where in fact, right, he was one of those in charge, right, of what was going on in the East.
Actual work. He's doing what we would call empirical demographics, and it's his experiences you explained in demographics, populations, you know, and so forth, that made him useful for this. He's one of the minds behind.
Well, yeah, he had done that back in the 30s, but now at this point, right, he wasn't really engaged in things like that. One of his colleagues was, but what he was doing, right, he was working for Rosenberg, and he was doing many things, including, like, they had to indoctrinate or teach for instance, there in Ukraine, they had to, and other places, they had to indoctrinate the local police. And so what were they indoctrinating the local police squads into? All the classical anti-Semitic tropes of the Nazis. So they were instilling, and these troops, or these squads, these police squads, would then go out and round up Jews and shoot them in the pits. So he's not a historian, right, at this point in the war. He's an active administrator, all right, in the Nazi machinery of death in the Holocaust. Right. So
get off. Why did, I mean, obviously you explained the politics. It seems outrageous injustice, though.
Yeah, I think is one of the greatest injustices, right, in the post-Holocaust history. It's just absolutely a mind-boggling case. And right, the U.S. Department of Justice, right, right, which is where you had the OSI,
right, and they managed the Nuremberg trials, yeah.
Right, the OSI. Well, one of the lawyers or one of the attorneys at the OSI was this Jeffrey Mausner. He's still alive. I want to do an interview with him. He was working there on the OSI in the 1970s when it became known that Leibbrandt had been granted a visa to visit the United States because he wanted to do some historical research, right, 1970s. And Mausner wrote the German authorities, right, you know, can't you cancel this? You know, it's actually illegal, right, for SS people to be granted a visa and to visit the United States, at least back then. And but anyway, he did. He went. He was able to go to the United States, visit, have lots of fun, with old buddies and family, and then his brother up in Canada, Gottlieb, who's also this raging anti-Semite, who'd also been honored by the Canadian government for his multicultural contributions. But Mausner sent copies of all of the evidentiary material against Leibbrandt, right, to the German authorities, and they just remained totally silent. And Nick Donovan, who's an award-winning British journalist who had interviewed Mausner, told me that he asked Mausner, why was there no response from the German authorities? Because what the OSI was asking the German authorities was, this man should be tried again. Look at this evidence. I mean, it's a smoking gun. This one document that they had where he says, "Yeah, I intend to bring as quickly as possible a solution to this Jewish problem," and that killing operation, I think, involves something like 40,000 Jews, but Mausner, his response says, well, they just didn't give a damn about Jews, and there were still a lot of former Nazis, right, in control of the West German government, right, and so you put it all together, it sort of makes sense, right?
So the German government and the American government knew this by the 1970s, or did the American government yet know this?
Oh, this is the OSI. This is the American government. This is the DOJ, right? The OSI is part of the DOJ, the Department of Justice.
Yes, it is.
Right?
It's amazing. So both American and German officials knew this at the time, and they allowed him to travel freely. And
absolutely, and to be an economic advisor to the Bonn government. And this to me is. For years, I've tried to find someone, right, in the world of documentary filmmaking who would, make a serious documentary about this, because I think it's one of the most outrageous, and frustrating. It's just mind-boggling. I just can't find the words to describe this, the whole story. Someone who attended the Wannsee conference, was responsible for tens of thousands, if not more, murders of Jews, to get off, and I can't help but think that this lie that he told at his trial, that he said, I was not, anti-Semitic, ideologically driven Nazi. And I, in fact, said that the Endlösung, right, was a Wahnsinnpolitik. All of this, I think that contributed to this portrayal of him as sort of like a buffoon in that first film adaptation, as if he were ignorant, as if he were not, one of the people responsible for the disappearance, right, through murder of Jews in the East, right. And so how I really got involved in this was in my grad school years. I always like to snoop around in the research library at the university, and I accidentally discovered this Nazi-era Nazi journal, published throughout the 1930s, right, into the early 40s, I think. But I found dozens and dozens of articles written by Leibbrandt in there, and they're all the most rabid anti-Semitic, Rosenberg type of anti-Semitic theology that you could imagine, right? So if those had been known, if the existence of those had been known during his trial, he would have spent his entire life in prison if not have been strung up.
So people didn't even look into
apparently they had no concept. They had no idea that these existed, that he had published all of these.
But there was
because they're not in the evidentiary materials, right, for the Nuremberg trials, which is on like hundreds of thousands of microfilms.
Yeah.
Any Holocaust scholar will know about those microfilms. So those are not on there, but so many other things are. But those journals were either completely unknown, ignored. I don't know, but they're not in it. So they were not known. So they were not a part of the prosecution against him. If they had been, right, his lie would have been impossible. But you can imagine what was on his mind at the time when he was telling this lie at his trial, knowing that he had published all those articles. But he must have been so happy that apparently everyone had forgotten about them, and their existence was unknown, right? Even less than a decade later of their publication, right? So it's
maybe some people weren't doing the research that, they were looking the other way and not doing the required research on purpose.
I don't know. It was also probably most of the evidentiary material, right, was not at the Nuremberg trials. The International Military Tribunal was not of that nature. Most of the evidentiary material were documents, right, seized during the war, correspondence, like relating to the daily unfolding of the war.
Right.
Right. So it was this type of criminal evidence, right? Someone signed this execution order or something of that nature, right? And so that
was so notorious a figure that you would think that any of his close agents there would have been some research into the people working that closely with Alfred Rosenberg. Everyone.
Well, there was, and there were some documents, right, that were including some of the ones that the OSI sent to the German government that I mentioned, right? There was some, but law also, right, as you know, is it's a field that is very technical, right? And so, right, a lot of people get away with murder and lesser crimes, right, on technicalities, right? And so there were certain technicalities. Like there was this one, a very damning document, right, which Leibbrandt had signed, but he had signed it, he had initialed it with an L. And so the defense says, oh, that was Loza. That was Edward Loza, not Leibbrandt. So there's that type of dynamic going on as well. But as I said, if those essays that he had published throughout the 30s had been known to the prosecution, his claim of, screaming Wannsee-Politik at the Wannsee conference would have been just laughed out of court, right? But it had an effect because I have come across Holocaust scholars who, in ignorance, right, that just haven't. I mean, not everyone can know everything, right, about every individual, but who were under the mistaken impression that Leibbrandt was a what's it called in English, a moderate Nazi, right? But that's just the echoes of his lie at his trial.
Do you think?
I would say, I gave a presentation on all this evidence at the 2003 New Orleans German Studies Association conference. And when I finished during the Q&A session, I can't remember the name, it's back in 2003, but an Ivy League professor of some weight, heavyweight scholar, became livid with me and said, what the hell are you doing? What the hell does any of this mean? This is a complete waste of time, complete waste. This kind of research is complete waste. Why would you do it? Right. And I was there with Michael Fallbusch, right, who was presenting together with me, right, on a different subject. I think he presented before me. So it was a Q&A for the both of us, Michael Fallbusch, and Anyway, I had to gather my thoughts for a little bit, but I did. And my response was, well, the reason for this is that tens of thousands of innocent people were murdered because of this man, because of Leibbrandt, and their memory, at the very least, their memory, right? It, these facts deserve to be known, just for the sake of honoring the victims' memories. Well, there's much more that could be said, but just that's the basic point. But what was shocking was that an Ivy League professor had no qualms, had no reticence about publicly being so vicious, right? Attacking this kind of research, right? I think it was very similar to the attitude of some people who say, well, why do they want to bring this 99-year-old former SS guard to trial in modern Germany, right? So maybe something akin to that type of reaction, right? So,
But
they're thinking about I guess they see a 99-year-old human being and just feel bad for them or something like this, but which totally overlooks what they were responsible for.
Exactly. I myself was a lawyer for almost 18 years and a public prosecutor in America. And I wouldn't care if it was a 99-year-old person who'd been kind to children for the previous 30 years. If they had committed a murder 30 years earlier, we prosecute him. And even if I'm just getting the facts out, it's a question of, one, the historical facts, and two, the obvious question of justice. And to be so
Right.
shocked that the Ivy League professor would be so.
Well, we know this. There are a lot of DAs, a lot of prosecutors who spend decades on the trail of
Right.
someone who has killed one human being.
Precisely.
And they never give up. But here we have someone who is responsible for tens of thousands, if not more, murders. And well,
unbelievable. It's a huge matter of justice. And I want to say thank you, Dr. Zinner, for your work. This is such an important chapter of human history. If we can't learn from this, and we need the detailed knowledge, just historically as in terms of fact, but obviously there's a huge matter of justice here as well. So I want to thank you, Dr. Zinner, for your research and your work. I most appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I agree with everything that Valliant said there. We have a super chat question.
Sure.
Thank you for your super chat. Why is the carving of Jesus at Ennis Monastery shown as raising the swastika? Why do some scholars think the swastika was a depiction of a comet?
Maybe some of you might know that, but I would say, of course, I think everyone knows that the shape of the swastika, right, is a pretty universal, ancient symbol, right? And so you can't connect that, at least not in every instance, right, with the use of the swastika in the by the Nazis. There's two different things there, but sure, I think the general understanding of the swastika, like in ancient India, is usually considered a solar symbol. It may have other symbolisms in other cultures, but there, I think it was a solar symbol.
May I ask, I don't know, since it's so relevant to matters of today, in the last several days, I've heard Australian anti-Israeli protesters chanting things like "gas the Jews." I've heard protesters in New York City saying things like "kill the Jews" as they hold up swastikas. I hear language that is used, for example, saying that Israel is engaged in genocide in Gaza when Hamas won't let their own people escape, when Egypt won't let people leave, even after Israel gives a warning, say, or knowing what Israel could do militarily, utterly wipe it out if they wanted to 2 weeks ago, and yet they still use the word genocide. I wonder if you have any comment on what's going on in recent weeks.
Well,
atrocities.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't, get into the whole history, right, behind the Israeli Palestinian or even Israeli Hamas history. That's probably for another night because it'd be very involved, as you know. But what could be pointed out is of course there's two ways of looking at this. And I've been listening a lot to public discourse, of course. One is there is a tendency to condemn the Hamas massacre of October 7th, and then to immediately launch into the history, right, of modern Israel. And sometimes going all the way back to the 1948 Independence War in order to give some kind of historical context to what just happened. Right, so that's one way to deal with it. And I think that's flawed. And why? Because what Hamas did and what they have been doing for decades, and they have been massacring and macheteing Jews up and cutting them up for decades. This is not the first time. And I've yet to hear that point made very much in the press, even on the Israeli side. But I mean, this has been going on for quite a while. But so what Hamas is doing really has nothing to do with the whole issue of the quote unquote Palestinian problem or this issue. Right. So what Hamas is doing is rooted in just hatred of Jews, the traditional hatred of Jews that goes back centuries and even more. So that's what we're seeing a manifestation of here, right? And period, that's what it is, right? And I forget her name, but one of the victims who happily survived, one of the victims 10, 15 or more years ago, this is a woman, an Israeli. She was with a Christian friend, right? And she was showing this Christian friend from America, I think. She was on some kind of a tour, right? So seeing sites in Israel, and they were, and then these two Hamas people had penetrated the border and found them, and so they found her Israeli passport, and they assumed that her friend was also a Jew. So they started to kill them, and so she watched them kill and cut up the body, right, with a machete of her friend, and amazingly, she herself survived. They didn't cut her up, but at the very end, they wanted to make sure she was dead, so they plunged a knife right into her heart. It missed by 4 millimeters. So that's how it. But a documentary was made about this. Let me get to the main point. A documentary was made about this, and these two Hamas operatives were apprehended, and they appear in the documentary. They were taken back by the authorities to the scene, and they were asked, "Why did you do this?" This has nothing to do with Palestinian rights and this whole thing. It's because we hate Jews. That's it, period. There's no wider context than that. We hate Jews. That's it. So I would say that what happened on October the 7th, is just a manifestation of the centuries and even more, right, old hatred of Jews. So I think that the discussion about occupation, the West Bank, and all this has to be separate. There's a different dynamic there, right? So it has to be kept separate, and that's probably as much as I could say about it. But Sure. Well, the media everywhere, right? It's a very and on the ground, right, in London and Sydney, and there's a very charged atmosphere. That's all I can say. Right, you see it, but no, to a certain extent, I'm at a loss for words, because I actually have a lot of hope. Believe it or not, even right now, I have a lot of hope for the future. What happened on October 7th was really the result of Iran's not wanting Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
Right.
Now, despite what's happening right now, I actually am hopeful. I think that deal actually will eventually, there will be this normalization, probably sooner rather than later. It's going to be later than would have otherwise been the case, but I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful, right, that still will work. And so I'm hopeful for the future. Just as a historian, if you look back, right, if you can see that Israelis and Germans became friends, anything I think can happen, right? And so I don't think we should despair. It's easy to do that, and I don't blame anyone who does. But personally, with a historical perspective, I actually am hopeful. I'm not going to give up hope.
Well, it is absolutely true that people who could be, life and death enemies, at each other's throats, and the next generation can be fast friends. It's astonishing how history does teach us that. But it does look pretty grim at the moment.
Sure, and it's understandable that Jews may feel threatened or apprehensive in places like Sydney or London or many places in America. I mean, when you have tens of thousands or even 100,000 chanting these types of slogans, what do you expect? Certainly, there's going to be fear and apprehension, and I mean, even before all this happened, right? One has to be careful. I mean, you really don't want to wear a kippah in Europe. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, even last year, or the year before that, or the year before that, you have to be careful. It's shameful, but that's the fact.
It is shameful that my Jewish friends are afraid to go out and play certain places, and or to let their Jewish identity be known in certain places. It's shameful.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to answer any questions I can, but it's a very involved topic. It's a very involved topic.
Bring up the complexities of the contemporary moment, but they were just
well, it's complex because right, we can take this back to the Shoah, the Holocaust, and then up to like the 1948 Independence War in Israel. We can do that, but even going back that far, there are a lot of different historical interpretations and understandings of all of these events. Some of them almost contradictory, and yet when you look at each argument, they seem plausible as you're listening to them, right? So there are valid disagreements, right, that good historians have, right, about motivations and in Israeli-Palestinian interaction going back to right that time of the founding of the modern state of Israel, right? And then, so it's already complex there because there's so much disagreement. It's like the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? There are a lot of historians, right, who have different views of whether or not it was justifiable, right, from a point of view of ethics or something like this. And when you listen to each side, it's sometimes each side may sound plausible to a different extent, right? So it's very complex. So if you want to go back before that and then get into the history of Christian theology, supersessionism, and et cetera, just gets even more amazingly complex. Right, so because there's a big debate about that. Certainly, the Christian doctrine of supersessionism did not cause the Holocaust, but one could ask, well, would it have happened without that remote precursor? Right. So it can be very, very complex.
The whole history of anti-Semitism in Europe. I mean, Europe has a long history of anti-Semitism. It, has many causes, manifestations, emphases as you go through the course of history.
Right, and one of the aspects of that also, fast forwarding now to what's happening now with like Hamas, and then this type of terrorism in general. This is known by a lot of historians, and one just has to research a bit to find this out. And for instance, the whole phenomenon of hijacking jets, hijacking passenger planes, right, which is associated with Islamist terrorists. This was learned by them from their Marxist communist trainers, right? So this is classic communist techniques, right? Asymmetric warfare and things like this. All right. So, right. And so one of the early massacres in Israel.
Just hijack the plane and take me to Cuba.
Right. And so one of the famous massacres in Israel at an airport was carried out by 3 Japanese, if you recall that. Why 3 Japanese? They were communists.
Right.
And so this type of asymmetric, this type of communist affiliation, which many of these Islamists, and you think of the modern Republic of Iran, this is a fundamentally revolutionary Marxist based basis to this. So what I'm saying is many people may have heard of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, right, friend of Hitler. Right, and so there is this fact also, and there are some good books on this subject too, that there actually is a Nazi strain of ideology in modern Islamist anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So that has to be taken into account as well, and I think we see the reverberations of that in Hamas. We know, right, the Nazi influence on, I think it was the uncle, who was the mentor of Saddam Hussein, right? And so if you look at this history very closely, you're going to see a lot of Nazi and a lot of communist inspiration, right, in modern Islamist terrorism. In the techniques, but also in the philosophy. One of the other philosophy and the techniques is that I forget who said it, but it was one of their communist friends who told. I don't know if we're talking about Hamas here or but a group like Hamas. If you kill one Jew who is a civilian, right? This is better than killing 100 Israeli soldiers, right? And so that's how the Intifada started, actually, even, right? So I'm going to start Intifada because that's more effective. But that's a standard trick, right? In the old Marxist Leninist playbook, right? For these types of asymmetric scenarios.
Use the guy's morality against himself. We will go in, attack civilians, take hostages, and then if you attack, well, it's your fault if the hostages get hurt. For example.
Well, also, right, and
higher morality.
Right. You remember when there was that massacre of 22 Israeli children at the school, right? And the Islamist terrorists who did that, are then held as heroes throughout Europe, even, right? So how is that possible? Well, it's because they have the at that time the entire propaganda apparatus of the former Soviet Union behind them, painting them as resistance fighters, right? And that's still the terminology that you hear by Hamas today, and also by some pathetic souls among journalists today. Is there is that what Hamas did is resistance, right, to Israeli occupation or whatever. This is resistance, right? And I think even one of the politicians, since I'm not in America, I don't want to name names, but you all know who I'm talking about. One of the members of the American government said that, used that word resistance, that this was a form of resistance, right? They're in the Senate of the United States.
Well, you pointed out,
right?
This is rank anti-Semitism and an attempt to scuttle a peace deal with the Saudis.
Right. Well, yeah, but again, I'm hopeful. So it's just that this delay in the ultimate normalization, I think, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, it's unfortunate. It's deplorable. It's just an unspeakable tragedy that it has to come at such a high cost of mostly innocents, right, in Gaza.
Horrific, yeah.
And on that, I'll say something. It may or may not be controversial, but I think it bears pointing out. Right, there is a lot of talk, of course, right, about the clear legal distinction, right, between murder and killing, right? So what Hamas does, and what they did on October 7th, is legally murder. Right, so this is murder, right? Now, collateral damage in a war, this is killing, right?
Right.
This is fundamentally different, right? And so this to make an equivalence between the two, that there's no difference between what Hamas did and now what is happening in Gaza. This is just this is obscene, ethically speaking, but also legally speaking, right?
Well, it's an aggressor in a war is actually responsible for their own.
That's right. So
it's particularly worse because not only is the aggressor Hamas here, but they intentionally use their own civilians as shields. That hospitals, schools, residential areas is where they put their military stuff, and they're trying to maximize. And by refusing to allow their people to flee, when the Israelis warn civilians, get out, so they minimize civilian damage, Hamas itself keeps them from fleeing the area where Israel must bomb. And so in this case, Hamas is intentionally, in my view, murdering their own people, maximizing their own civilian deaths so that they can blame it on the Israelis, and soft-headed people in the Western media and Western government get sucked in to this idea that they're not murdering their own babies to blame Israelis for the murder of the baby.
Right. Well, the point I was going to make was that the all of the anger, right, about civilians who are killed in Gaza now, that anger is understandable. Anger and sorrow, but that anger should 100% of it should be directed against Hamas.
Agreed. Totally.
It's just disordered, right? To direct it towards the Israelis. It's fundamentally disordered. I'm not saying, and I'm, and one always has to say this, but I'm genuinely sincere, right? There are many things I would fault Israel for throughout their history. So I'm not coming from like a settler mentality or something like this.
Right.
And I'm as shocked as I think every decent person should be that someone like Gvir, who is in the Israeli government, in charge of the security apparatus, right, where he was not allowed to be part of the IDF, right, because he was considered to be in a terrorist organization, the Kahanist group, right? So there's something, so it's not as if I don't have criticisms, right, of Israel, but in this case, clearly, they are not the aggressor, and they are defending themselves. And those who, civilians who die in bombings, right? This is certainly a tragedy, but the anger should be directed to Hamas, not to Israel.
Now, James, I know you want to talk about the appeasement of Iran in the past. That
we don't need to I think that would probably be inappropriate now.
Okay.
Given the nature of the discussion, Jacob, we can talk about that some other time.
Sure.
I'm just interested in Doctor's interviews, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I want to thank you again for
maybe
joining.
a part 2 at some point.
Yeah, a further discussion of the issue. But I want to I was interested here today in Doctor's interviews, and I want to thank him again for his joining us and sharing his wisdom with us.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. If I can add one last point, since I've
sure
sort of been, I don't know, deeply engaged, right, with thinking about the Holocaust since my youth. Although I'm very hopeful about the future, I'll make this point. I think the one very important reason for there to be a modern state of Israel, right, is that something like the Holocaust, the show never happens again, right? And without that type of government state framework, we have every reason to expect that there would be another Holocaust. I mean, you just have to not be blind, right? Reading human history, right? And if we look at what's happening now, especially, right, with hundreds of thousands, sometimes tens of thousands in these European pro-Hamas protests, not only Jews, but everyone of goodwill should be really concerned. Right.
I have no religious beliefs whatever, and I was raised by Protestants, but I was outraged by what happened, and I'm surprised, frankly, at the numbers that we see in these Palestinian demonstrations around the world, and what they're saying and the nature of it. I'm kind of taken aback.
Well, the point I was going to make was that if there were not forces in position, what I mean is if there were not a modern state of Israel, right, what we're seeing now, right, would give us caution. I mean, it would give us signs. These are danger signs, right? So besides being a Holocaust scholar, I've done a lot of research in comparative genocide research, right? And so the causes of genocide, what happens leading up to them, and so how do we prevent them? And so there's, well, all these, there's a whole field in international law about, what kind of laws to craft in order to try to prevent genocides from occurring again. But if you look at, what usually transpires before a genocide actually takes place, right? There are many things. I'm not going to go through the whole litany, but I would say that these types of protests that we're seeing, right, is a very worrying sign, and it would be much more worrying if there were not a way for Jews to protect themselves, like a state of Israel, which of course does not protect Jews who don't live there, right? But it is very worrying, right? So it is. I've spoken with relatives and friends, and I usually now say that it really looks like we're seeing storm clouds gathering on the horizon, which is very troubling. So I just wanted to add that in there, not to deny, but to complement, my hopeful view, right, for the future. I'm truly hopeful, but we really, really must take what's happening today, we must take these as warning signs. We have to take it seriously. Take it seriously.
It increases the importance of you and researchers like you into the Holocaust, the importance of your work. I think recent events have actually thrown into highlight. So again, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Completely agree. Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely.
We have 3 more super chats. Let's just take these real quick and then we'll close.
Sure.
JC, thank you for your super chat. Why is the saffron crocus probably the source of the flower of life and Star of David depicted frequently on ancient Jewish ossuaries? Sorry, JC, but this is
These are historical questions, really not related to what we're talking about tonight. But why is the saffron crocus probably the source of the flower of life and star? Well, I'm not quite sure what the flower of life is. The Magen David, the star or the shield of David depicted. Ancient Jewish ossuaries, I wouldn't describe the hexagram. First of all, that's not the Star of David at that time, right? That's a modern understanding of the hexagram. But it's not even that hexagram is not found frequently on ancient Jewish ossuaries. It's more, you will find the menorah quite a bit. You know,
right.
Like at the Bet Sherim cemetery, right? For instance, that's quite ancient. But the hexagram, that's something that only becomes a symbol of Jewish identity in like Prague. You know, what is it? Do you know, Jim? So like the 1600s or something like that.
It's definitely a modern type phenomenon, yeah.
And then as a universal Jewish symbol of identity, that's not even until the early 20th century.
Right. Oh, infamously, of course, the Nazis made Jews wear stars and so forth. But it wasn't a symbol, as far as I know, until recent centuries, and I mean very recent centuries.
Yeah, it's recent, and the
ossuaries and Jewish tombs, they typically have
rosettes
or temple imagery, as you point out, the menorah, table, temple imagery and rosettes. Yes, exactly, are more common. Jewish funerary images in the ancient world, which I'm more familiar with.
And since he has the flower of life with that really sort of might connect with the menorah, which is sort of like a plant inspired object, you know, like an almond or some. There's actually in the Middle East, there is a type of plant that looks like a menorah, right? And so it's theorized, I think, that that's probably, you know, what inspired it. And forgive me, I can't remember the name of that plant. But there was a recent essay actually arguing the case for that, and the branches sort of are more straight rather than more like rounded and curved, more like the Chabad style menorah, which is more like that plant.
Right.
Anyway, let's get to this other question.
JC, thank you for your super chat. Is it coincidence that roots of the names Joshua, Ephraim, Ephrata, and Joseph all appear in the cuneiform words for saffron and the crocus?
Yeah, which cuneiform? What are we talking about? Babylon, Assyria.
I think that's in the next super chat. Sumerian, Kurgan equals Akkadian, Karkanu, and B Hebrew, Karkum, Azubur, Saffron, Azu, Healer, whence Yesha, Andasam, Crocus, Da is Azabu, whence Joseph.
It's probably just not the right place to address this. I'm a trained philologist in comparative Semitic languages, and I'm not buying into the argument here. It looks a little speculative. It's possible, but it looks like, you know, a speculative theory that would have to be sort of demonstrated to me with a little more evidence.
We need more connection there.
Thank you for those super chats, JC.
Yes. Intriguing. I say it's intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Intriguing.
Well,
I would say though that if you think of the Hebrew word Joshua, the Hebrew name Joshua, right? It seemed to be like, was there a correlation in that question between that and this concept of healing? Or
always saves.
But yeah, but in Hebrew, right? Salvation, right, has a very distinctive meaning, right? And it's not what the Christians think.
Yeah,
right? It's right. It's in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, to be saved is an act of rescue from a concrete, usually physical threat, like a threat in war or sickness. But you are rescued. That's what saving. You are rescued, and it's always from a physical threat, right? So it's not salvation of a soul, in the sense that a lot of people would say, "Well, has your soul been saved?"
Right.
It's not that. Souls don't get saved other than the sense of a nephesh being used as denoting the person as a whole, right? But there's no spiritual salvation. There's salvation from the enemy attacking you in a war.
Right, a very earthly salvation is thought of in the original Hebrew context.
Right. And so I guess you could be saved from a physical illness, right? But there's no strong connection, right, between Yasha and healing, right, in Semitic languages.
We'll just take this one last super chat that just came in, then we'll just close. JC, thank you for your super chat. Sumerian Azu is healer. Akkadian Asu, Hebrew Yesha.
Yeah, again, what one has to make sure is that there's there's an actual etymological relation between these very similar sounding words in these different Semitic languages, right? And so it's an interesting question, very intriguing. I'll say that.
And if Dr. Zinner can't add anything, I sure can't. But thank you so much, Zinner, for joining us today.
Thank you for joining me, Dr. Samuel Zinner, James Valliant, and
it's my pleasure.
JC, thank you for those super chats, and I'll see everybody later.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.